Overpaying for anything sucks, especially socks, so why pay $45 for a single pair of grip socks when you can spend less than half? Pure Grip Socks Pro feature our best materials for optimal fit, moisture wicking, and performance at a fair price, just $16.99 a pair at puregripsocks.com.
The word revolutionary gets thrown around far too often in the world of football boots, where more often than not, the revolution that's being promised by way of a new concept or a new piece of technology offers no benefit when it comes to performance and often no real difference when it comes to feel. The full Flyknit mid-cut upper of the Magista Obra was revolutionary. The textured upper on the Phantom GT was not. Which, speaking of new, ladies and gentlemen, the all-new and more or less completely redesigned Nike Zoom Mercurial Vapor 15 Elite, one of two top-end Mercurial models for this latest generation, the other being the Superfly 9 Elite, the exact same boot with the addition of a mid-cut collar. $250 for the Vapor 15, $275 for the Superfly 9, meaning that pricing has not changed. But as you can see, written very boldly along either side of the upper, this new Mercurial features Nike's Air Zoom tech, which is actually not a first for the Mercurial line. We saw this technology 22 years ago on the Match Mercurial, but this time around, admittedly, it is quite a bit different. The question is it revolutionary or just a bunch of hype? Well, without spoiling too much, and you should definitely watch the review to get the details of what I'm about to say, but the hype is real and the revolution is here because Air Zoom tech in the latest Mercurial is really something special. And don't get me wrong, I am not saying that these boots are going to make you play better because that's obviously not the case, but from a feel perspective, what this new Air Zoom technology offers is unlike anything else that I've ever tried, and I really do feel like it's something special. So if you're interested in learning more what these boots are all about, how they compare to the previous generation of Mercurials, as well as how they fit and feel on feet, please stick around and watch the entire review. And if you are interested in a pair of these for yourself, as of July 1st, when they drop, there will be buy it now links on the review page of my website, along with exclusive SR4U coupon codes, where you'll be able to pick these up below their normal retail price by checking out the first link down below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2022. Even the string bag has air. Now, there are so many reasons to be a fan of the Nike Mercurial series, from the incredible players that have worn them over the years, from the signature feel that it has, from the technology that it's introduced into the football boot industry. It's a line that's been around for forever, originally launching in 1998. And if we look back at its history, they've had a ton of game-changing products, I think most notably being the original Vapor 1 that came out in 2002, where if you look at that football boot, it's hard to believe that those came out 20 years ago, and the fact that what's coming out now in 2022 has any sort of resemblance to a football boot that's 20 years old really goes to show how far ahead of its time that boot actually was. With that said, I think part of the staying power of the Mercurial series has been the fact that it's kind of taken that recipe of the Vapor 1 and it simply refined it over the years. Yes, there have been new materials and new technologies and new ideas, but the same core formula that makes a Mercurial feel like a Mercurial has remained intact until this year, where with the Vapor 15 and the Superfly 9, they're adding in the Air Zoom tech, which I think is actually a really big change for the Mercurial series, a lot more so than I think a lot of people realize. And obviously you can see the Zoom logo on the bottom of the sole plate, and even for this launch colorway, they printed Air in giant letters on either side of the upper, but it's what's happening on the inside, the part that you can't see, that you need to be excited about. Remove the insole, and you'll start to notice that things get a little bit unusual and that it is the standard mesh liner on top. This looks pretty normal. Flip it over, however, and you'll find that it's a standard yellow foam, something we're used to seeing on the Mercs, but there's a cavity that's been cored out the majority of the insole that fits directly on top of the 3/4 length Zoom unit that this time around has been designed specifically for football boots. Now, for those completely unfamiliar with Nike's Zoom Air tech, it's something that's been around within the brand for a very long time and used on all kinds of different footwear. Like I mentioned, it was on the Match Mercurial 22 years ago, and it's been on a bunch of other football boots over the years, none of them obviously being recent releases. With that said, Zoom Air has been very prevalent in the running world as of late, where Nike released a running shoe that effectively got banned, and the rules needed to be changed because of how effective it was at returning energy. And I guess to explain Zoom Air in the simplest terms, it's a really thin airbag that is under a ton of pressure, reinforced by these fibers, that's designed to spring you up as soon as it's compressed, providing some level of energy return. Think of it like an air mattress that has been overinflated to the point where if you do jump on it, you sink in really quickly but then bounce back up really fast. And maybe that's not the best example, because I think when you hear overinflated air mattress, you automatically assume it's going to pop if you jump on top of it, and that is not really a concern with the Zoom unit in these football boots, or really any Zoom unit I've ever experienced on a pair of Nike shoes in general. Durability should not be a concern if it was for you. And this is where the review gets a little tricky, because I can't exactly show you how this Zoom unit works. I can show you that they've added little stripes on the surface with some texturing to prevent the insole from sliding around. I can show you that there is an area targeted around the big toe, the rest of your toes, as well as the forefoot with articulated flex grooves, but I can't really show you how it feels. And I think the feel is the special aspect of this boot. It's the element that is revolutionary. And what I will say is what's so surprising about these is that they have a running shoe flow to them that I've never experienced when running in any other pair of football boots. It's that feeling of running in a really nice pair of running shoes where every time your foot hits the ground, there's this smoothness in transition from the impact to your foot leaving the ground for your next stride. The boots have so much flow to them, and I can't say that's something I've ever experienced in another pair of football boots. I don't necessarily think there's that much in the way of energy return. Argument to be made that there's definitely more energy return from this than any other football boot on the market, but I think the comfort aspect and the smoothness, that's the word that I think you need to take away from this review, that you get with this football boot underneath your foot, specifically in the forefoot, is just unlike anything else that I've ever tried. I wore these on a couple different playing surfaces, including really hard ground, and the smoothness when running is really what stood out to me. And just a few other things to mention regarding the Zoom unit is that it sits directly on the top side of the sole plate, eliminating a lot of extra layers of material that you would traditionally find in a sole plate construction. Nike in their press release mentions that this keeps you closer to the ground. I didn't necessarily find that to be the case. I would say that they feel as low profile as other Mercurials that I've worn. And also, because that Zoom unit kind of sits into the sole plate a little bit, it does maintain that anatomic shaping feel that's kind of become a signature of the Mercurial series, really giving you that one-to-one connection to the base of your boots, which I think is something that's really special, and I would argue feels better on these than it ever has on a pair of Mercs. Also, I heard quite a few complaints regarding the Zoom unit not being full length. It does obviously cut off at the heel, but honestly, the way this Zoom unit feels when you're on the balls of your feet, it kind of puts you on your toes. It's a sensation that you don't want to get away from, and honestly, the less time you're spending on the pitch with your heels on the ground, the better it's going to be for you in terms of just being ready and arguably even being a little bit quicker. As for what's happening around the Zoom unit, I can only describe it as high-level refinement from Nike, and we're actually going to start with what I think is the second biggest change, and that is the FG stud pattern, where you'll notice in the forefoot, you no longer have those chevron bladed studs that have kind of become a signature of the Mercurial series over the last several generations. In place of those chevron studs are these three-sided blades that were first introduced on the Nike GS 360 in limited quantities, and then recently seen again on the Air Zoom Ultra. A really good stud pattern. The idea behind this three-sided shape is to have, again, even better multi-directional grip, in that there are now more sides to this bladed stud. Whether or not it actually results in better overall traction, I can't say that was my experience. It feels as aggressive as all the other Mercurial stud patterns I've worn over the last several years. I don't think there have been any major gains in that area. This is just a little bit of a different feel with very similar performance, I guess is the best way to describe it. And then the one, I would say, arguably most unique aspect of the stud pattern are these smaller heel studs towards the front that kind of have this half circle blade that connect the two. I guess this is acting as somewhat of a stiffener bar for the sole plate rather than a traction element, but it looks quite cool. And the sole plate as a whole, now being a solid sole plate rather than a split sole, is more so I think down to the fact that they have implemented this Zoom Air tech. This allows them to have less layers of material and in turn make the boot feel a little bit lighter. Speaking of which, is the Vapor 15 lighter or heavier than the Vapor 14 it replaces, especially given the fact that it does implement that zoom unit? How heavy is that? Well, both in a size 9.5 US. We'll start off with the outgoing Vapor 14 Elite. They weigh in at 7.05 ounces, the equivalent of 200 grams exactly. Change the scale back to ounces, and we'll throw on the brand new Vapor 15, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.6 ounces, the equivalent of 187 grams, which is actually quite impressive, almost half an ounce lighter than the model it replaces, and probably the lightest Mercurial Vapor since the Vapor 11. The upper is made from a material called Vapor Posit Plus, which, as the name would suggest, is a refinement of the material introduced on the last generation of Mercurials, where it's still a textile-based synthetic material, now with this chevron, almost carbon fiber-like weave, where you can see the chevron kind of connects at the front of the toe and the back of the heel. I absolutely love the way that it looks. It's way more technical in person. Your Nike Skin top layer for the sake of additional grip, some texturing because of the actual weave itself, where you can see it's a little bit more open in certain areas and a little bit tighter in others. And then, as Nike is touting in their press release, the new Speed Cage, where you can see there are some lines of reinforcement internally, basically some really thin plastic material to add structure in the areas where you need it for the sake of lockdown and responsiveness, and then you don't have that added structure in other areas where the boot kind of maintains a semi-translucent look for the sake of pliability and overall comfort. It's a story we've heard a million times from a bunch of different football boot brands. In general, it feels structured like a pair of Mercurial should be, but if we're comparing it to the last generation of Vapor Posit, the new liner I think is the biggest noticeable change in that it's this really, really fine mesh material. It makes for an upper that feels slightly thinner than what we had before and arguably a little bit more pliable, but more or less very similar. If you liked the feeling of the upper on the Vapor 14 and the Superfly 8, this is not a significant change, but it does feel quite good. And of course, not to be forgotten, ACC all conditions control technology is included, so if you need to play a match at the bottom of the ocean, you should be good to go. Also, just like the past several generations of Mercurial, there is a Flyknit component across the top of the foot where the boot does maintain its one-piece construction. Elasticated Flyknit that does have a little bit of a new pattern now that I would argue is a little bit more stretchy. I quite like the way that it feels. It does, of course, eliminate the little tongue on the back of the heel, which honestly, I like the look of that on the Vapor 14, but doesn't really impact performance in any way. The laces use that dual lace hole setup as usual, and with the laces tied tight, you still get that super tight Mercurial feel that we'll talk more about in just a second. And then the heel liner is another minor change compared to the previous generation of Mercs, where it's a little bit more sculpted in terms of where the padding is positioned. There's more up top than there is down low, some perforations within this microfiber material as well, but ultimately plenty of padding, super soft against your heel. Lockdown was quite good, and from a comfort perspective, I had no issues with blisters or lockdown at all. Now, like I mentioned earlier in the video, the feel of these boots on feet, specifically the zoom unit underneath your forefoot, is something that you really have to feel and can't be described. I would say that it feels like a zoom unit, so if you've worn other Nike footwear with Zoom Air, this is going to have somewhat of a familiar sensation in that there really isn't anything that feels quite like Zoom. It can't be copied with a foam. It's not like the Boost sole implementation we saw from Adidas a number of years ago. That did absolutely nothing. This is extremely noticeable. And like I said, it's not truly an energy return. Like, I can bounce around right now and I don't feel like the Zoom is pushing me back up or propelling me in any way. But when you're running and striding, there's a smoothness from this Zoom unit because of that slight amount of compression and spring back that it offers that I've never experienced from a pair of football boots. They're so smooth, they're so flowy, they're just unique, and I think that's something that's really, really positive, and I can't see very many people trying this on and not absolutely loving the way that it feels. But again, running in them versus standing around is a very different experience. I think the running experience is what really needs to be focused on here. As far as the shape and fit is concerned, they feel like Mercurials. There's really not much that needs to be said about it. The shape I don't think is that different from the previous generation of Mercs. They've maybe added a little bit of width and volume through the midfoot area closer to the top, but other than that, they feel pretty similar to me. I don't think that they're exceptionally wide. They're obviously not exceptionally narrow either. It's a football boot that, if you like that tight wrap around your foot, will fit most people. And I think this upper in particular just wraps your foot a little bit nicer. It feels a little bit more pliable. And again, it's a slight improvement over what they did with the previous generation. So from a width perspective, they'll definitely work for most people. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you're looking to order a pair for yourself, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So obviously I'm really impressed with the latest generation of Mercurial. I think all the refined elements from the past generation do legitimately feel better, even if it's just a little bit. And I think the implementation of Zoom Air with this new sole plate and stud pattern really does feel totally unique and unlike anything else that I've ever tried. The question is it truly revolutionary? And I think the answer to that question is so important because of the compelling options that you have from other brands in the speed boot category. Gone are the days where the Mercurial is the no-brainer option, because the Speed Flow from Adidas and the Ultra from Puma are all really good alternatives. But the Air Zoom Tech on offer here in this latest generation of Mercurials, it's tough for me to describe. It's really one of those things you have to feel for yourself, but the smoothness, the flow, the feeling that you get when running in these boots is truly unlike anything else that I've ever experienced. And given the choice right now between these and any other pair of speed boots, this is what I'm picking, and I'm picking it mainly based on the fact that I love the sensation of that Zoom unit. The Mercurial series is a line of football boots that was built on having a very particular feel, and Nike took a huge risk in adding to that original recipe, but I really do feel like that risk worked out, and this is now the new standard for what a Mercurial should feel like.